Picture the most luxurious hotel you can imagine, June 26, 1972. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel in Manhattan, where the city's elite come to see and be seen. Room 304, where the silk curtains are drawn tight against the morning sun. But something is terribly wrong in this sanctuary of luxury. A woman lies motionless on the pristine carpet. Her name is Dr. Catherine Wilson, 37 years old, and she should be preparing for another day of medical conferences. Instead, she will never wake up again. But here's what makes this moment even more chilling. Someone has carefully, almost tenderly, covered her naked body with a hotel bathrobe and her own dress. As if death wasn't final enough. As if dignity could somehow be preserved in this most undignified of endings. The room tells a story of contradiction. Everything is immaculate. The bathroom shows no signs of use. The bed remains perfectly made. The Do Not Disturb sign hangs on the door like a silent guardian of secrets. Yet Catherine Wilson bears the unmistakable marks of violence. Ligature marks around her throat. Bruises across her body that speak of a fierce struggle. She fought back. She fought hard. But it wasn't enough. This isn't just a story about a murder in a hotel room. This is about a brilliant woman whose independence made her dangerous to someone. About a society that would judge her choices more harshly than her killer's actions. About how a victim can be murdered twice, once by her attacker, and again by public opinion. In the next hour, you'll discover how a night of dancing became a dance with death. How professional colleagues can harbor the darkest secrets. And how a case with every piece of evidence imaginable somehow slipped through the fingers of justice. The truth about what happened in room 304 has remained locked away for over 50 years. But tonight, we're going to unlock that door. Catherine Wilson wasn't just any doctor. She was a woman who refused to let the world define what she could or couldn't be. Born into a well-to-do family in Portland, Oregon, Catherine had always been the kind of girl who turned heads. Beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was brilliant. While other girls her age were thinking about marriage and children, Catherine was thinking about molars and root canals. She earned her way into dental school at a time when female doctors were as rare as honest politicians. Her classmates weren't sure what to make of this stunning woman who could discuss periodontal disease with the same passion other women reserved for fashion magazines. During her final year of dental school, Catherine fell deeply in love with a fellow student. For 3 years, they planned a future together. They would open a practice, maybe start a family, live the American dream. But dreams have a way of turning into nightmares when you least expect it. Just 2 years after graduation, Catherine's fiancé took his own life. The reasons died with him, but the devastation nearly destroyed Catherine too. For months, she barely functioned. The woman who had always been in control of everything suddenly couldn't control anything. But Catherine Wilson was nothing if not a survivor. She picked herself up, dusted herself off, and threw herself into building her career. And somewhere along the way, she discovered something that brought joy back into her life. Dancing. Not just any dancing. Social dancing. Ballroom dancing. The kind of dancing where you held strangers close and let the music carry away your troubles. In 1972, this wasn't considered appropriate behavior for a professional woman, especially not a doctor. In 1963, Catherine met a truck driver at one of these dance halls. He was nothing like the professional men her family expected her to marry. He was rough around the edges, worked with his hands, came from the wrong side of town. Catherine didn't care. She married him anyway. Her family was horrified. A female dentist marrying a truck driver was scandalous enough. But when Catherine insisted that he take her name and help her run the dental practice, it became the talk of Portland's medical community. They had 2 children together, and for a while, it worked. Catherine ran the practice during the day while her husband learned to be a dental technician. He handled the house and children in the evenings. It was a completely modern arrangement that made their conservative neighbors deeply uncomfortable. Catherine didn't help her reputation by dressing the way she wanted to dress. While other professional women wore conservative suits and kept their hair in neat buns, Catherine favored mini skirts and flowing hair. She looked more like a movie star than a medical professional. The whispers followed her everywhere. Who does she think she is? That's not how a proper doctor should dress. What kind of mother leaves her children to go dancing? But Catherine had learned something important from her fiancé's death. Life is short, and you can't live it for other people's approval. When the opportunity came to attend a prestigious dental conference in New York City, Catherine didn't hesitate. It was a 10-session course that would cost thousands of dollars and require multiple trips across the country. Her colleagues thought she was crazy to spend so much money on continuing education. They didn't know that Catherine had another reason for wanting to come to New York. The city that never sleeps had dance halls that Portland could never dream of. This wasn't about abandoning her medical career. It was about feeding her soul while advancing her profession. So Catherine Wilson packed her dental journals in one suitcase and her dancing shoes in another. She was going to New York to be the best doctor she could be. And if that meant dancing until dawn between conference sessions, then that's exactly what she was going to do. She had no way of knowing that someone in that glittering city was watching, waiting, planning to make sure she would never dance again. To understand what happened to Catherine Wilson, we need to understand the two men who knew her best, Dr. Andrew Carter and Dr. Benjamin Clark, her colleagues from Portland who were supposed to be her friends. Andrew and Benjamin weren't just fellow dentists. They were Catherine's peers in a profession that barely tolerated women, let alone celebrated them. They had watched her build a successful practice while maintaining an unconventional marriage and an even more unconventional social life. Both men presented themselves as supportive colleagues. They attended the same dental conferences, shared professional challenges, even socialized occasionally. But beneath the surface of professional courtesy lurked something darker. The dental conference in New York wasn't just about continuing education. It was about escaping the small-town constraints of Portland, about experiencing the freedom that only a city like New York could offer. And Catherine Wilson, with her miniskirts and dancing shoes, represented everything that both fascinated and threatened these conventional men. Andrew Carter, in particular, had always been uncomfortable with Catherine's independence. He came from the kind of family where wives stayed home and husbands made all the decisions. Catherine's success as a female practitioner challenged everything he believed about the natural order of things. Benjamin Clark was more subtle in his disapproval, but no less judgmental. He watched Catherine's dancing habits with the kind of fascination typically reserved for car accidents, horrified but unable to look away. What made their relationship even more complex was that neither man could deny Catherine's professional competence. She was simply too good at her job to dismiss, too successful to ignore, too intelligent to condescend to. But there was something else brewing beneath the professional jealousy. Catherine Wilson was a beautiful woman who lived life on her own terms. For men like Andrew and Benjamin, who had been taught that women should be controlled and contained, Catherine represented a dangerous kind of freedom. The New York conference became their opportunity to see just how far Catherine's independence would take her, and what they saw both thrilled and disgusted them. Night after night, while they returned to their hotel rooms after dinner, Catherine would disappear into the city's dance scene. She would return in the early morning hours, glowing with the kind of satisfaction they could only dream of. They told themselves they were concerned about her reputation, about her safety, about her marriage back home in Portland. But really, they were consumed by a combination of desire and resentment that had been building for years. On June 25, 1972, that toxic combination was about to explode. But there was a third man in this story, someone whose relationship with Catherine was far more intimate and far more dangerous than her professional colleagues ever imagined. June 25, 1972. The night that would be Catherine Wilson's last. Catherine had been in New York for several days, attending conference sessions during the day and exploring the city's dance scene at night. She was in her element, professionally challenged and personally fulfilled. But Catherine had been keeping a secret from her Portland colleagues, Andrew and Benjamin. She wasn't just in New York for the conference. She was also there to see someone special. Dr. Christopher Cole had been Catherine's senior in dental school, a brilliant student who had gone on to establish a prestigious practice in Manhattan. More importantly, he had been her secret lover for over a year. Their affair had begun during a previous conference. Both were married, both had reputations to protect, but neither could resist the magnetic attraction they felt for each other. Catherine represented everything Christopher found lacking in his conventional wife: intelligence, passion, independence, and an intoxicating disregard for social expectations. For Catherine, Christopher offered something her marriage couldn't: intellectual equality combined with physical desire. He understood her professional ambitions because he shared them. He appreciated her unconventional spirit because he wished he had the courage to be unconventional himself. On June 24th, while Andrew and Benjamin assumed Catherine was out dancing alone, she was actually having an intimate dinner with Christopher at an upscale restaurant on the Upper East Side. They held hands across the table, planned future meetings, and talked about the possibility of leaving their respective spouses. But their affair was about to collide with Catherine's public life in the most dangerous way possible. June 25th began like any other conference day. Catherine attended morning sessions with Andrew and Benjamin, taking notes, asking intelligent questions, playing the role of the dedicated professional. But she was distracted, excited about her evening plans with Christopher. At dinner that night, the three Portland doctors sat in a restaurant near Times Square, discussing the day's presentations. Catherine seemed restless, checking her watch frequently. Finally, at 7:30 p.m., she claimed she wasn't feeling well and needed to return to the hotel. "I think I'm getting a migraine," she told Andrew and Benjamin. "I need to lie down before it gets worse." It was a lie, of course. Catherine was feeling perfectly fine. She was just eager to meet Christopher for another romantic evening. She even stopped at a fruit vendor on the way back to the hotel, buying grapes and strawberries, not for herself, but to share with her lover. Andrew and Benjamin, unaware of Catherine's deception, decided to see a movie after dinner. But Andrew's evening didn't go as planned either. At 8:30 p.m., he too claimed to be feeling unwell and returned to the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. This is where the timeline becomes crucial, and where coincidence begins to look like something much more sinister. Catherine had arranged to meet Christopher in her hotel room. It was risky. They had always met at his apartment before. But Catherine was feeling bold. She wanted to share the fruit she had bought, to make love in the luxury of her hotel suite, to pretend for one night that they were a real couple with nothing to hide. What Catherine didn't know was that someone else was watching her that night. Someone who had been growing increasingly obsessed with her unconventional lifestyle. Someone who had finally decided to put an end to Catherine Wilson's dancing forever. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel, June 25th, 1972, 8:45 p.m. Catherine Wilson stands in her hotel room, arranging the fruit she bought on her way back from dinner. She's wearing a beautiful dress, her hair is perfectly styled, and she's humming a tune from one of the dance halls she's been frequenting. She has no idea that this will be the last song she ever hums. Catherine has been careful about her affair with Christopher Cole. They've always met at his apartment, away from prying eyes and potential gossip. But tonight feels different. Tonight, she wants to be bold. She wants to make love to him in her own space, surrounded by luxury, pretending for one perfect evening that they have nothing to hide. At 9 p.m., there's a soft knock on her door. Catherine's heart races with anticipation as she approaches the door, expecting to see Christopher's familiar face. But when she opens the door, something goes terribly wrong. What happens next can only be reconstructed from the physical evidence left behind, because Catherine Wilson will never tell her side of the story. The struggle begins almost immediately. Catherine's body would later show defensive wounds, scratches, bruises, signs that she fought desperately for her life. She was a strong woman, made stronger by desperation, but her attacker was stronger. The ligature marks around her neck tell us that she was strangled, but not quickly. This wasn't a murder of passion, committed in a moment of rage. This was deliberate, prolonged, sadistic. Someone wanted Catherine to suffer. Someone wanted her to know she was dying. And then, in perhaps the most disturbing detail of all, the medical examiner would later determine that Catherine's body had been sexually assaulted after her death. This wasn't about passion or desire. This was about power, control, and a twisted need to degrade even her corpse. But here's what makes this crime even more chilling. Whoever killed Catherine Wilson was someone she knew. Someone she trusted enough to let into her hotel room. Someone who understood her well enough to know exactly how to hurt her. The killer then did something that reveals their twisted psychology. They carefully dressed Catherine's body, covering her with her own dress and a hotel bathrobe. It was an act that suggested both intimacy and shame, as if the killer felt some perverse need to preserve Catherine's dignity, even after violating it completely. The room was meticulously cleaned. No fingerprints on obvious surfaces. No signs of disturbance except for Catherine's body. Even the fruit she had arranged so carefully was left untouched, as if the killer wanted to preserve the scene exactly as Catherine had prepared it for her romantic evening. Then came the final insult. The "Do Not Disturb" sign was placed on the outside of the door. Catherine Wilson, who had spent her life refusing to be silenced, was now trapped in a tomb of her own making. Somewhere in the hotel that night, a killer walked the halls, probably showered, maybe even slept peacefully, knowing that Catherine's body wouldn't be discovered for hours. But killers, no matter how careful, always leave traces. And in Catherine Wilson's case, those traces would lead to one of the most frustrating unsolved murders in New York City history. June 26, 1972, 9 a.m. Andrew Carter and Benjamin Clark stand in the hallway outside room 304, knocking repeatedly on Catherine's door. They're supposed to settle their dinner bill from the previous night, and Catherine isn't answering. At first, they assume she's sleeping off her supposed migraine. But as the knocking continues without response, a different kind of concern begins to creep in. "Catherine?" Andrew calls out. "Are you all right in there?" Silence. Benjamin tries the door handle. Locked, of course. The "Do Not Disturb" sign hangs there like an accusation, but something feels wrong. Catherine was always punctual, always professional. Missing a financial obligation wasn't like her. Finally, they approach the front desk. The hotel manager, initially reluctant to disturb a guest's privacy, agrees to open the door after Andrew and Benjamin explain their concerns. What they find will haunt them for the rest of their lives. Catherine Wilson lies on the carpet, her body carefully arranged, covered with clothing as if she's simply taking a nap. But the unnatural stillness, the waxy pallor of her skin, tells a different story. Andrew Carter, despite his medical training, immediately turns away and vomits. Benjamin Clark stands frozen, unable to process what he's seeing. The hotel manager quickly herds them out of the room and calls the police. Within minutes, room 304 becomes a crime scene. NYPD detectives arrive to find a puzzle that will challenge every assumption they have about hotel murders. Detective Robert Martinez, the lead investigator, has seen plenty of hotel room murders in his 15-year career. Usually, they're straightforward. Crimes of passion, robbery gone wrong, domestic disputes that turn violent. But Catherine Wilson's murder immediately strikes him as different. First, there's the cleanliness of the scene. Most hotel room murders are messy, chaotic affairs. This one looks almost staged, as if someone took great care to arrange everything just so. Second, there's the victim herself. Catherine Wilson wasn't a typical murder victim. She was a successful professional woman with no obvious enemies, no known involvement with criminals or dangerous situations. What was she doing that got her killed? Third, there's the evidence. Both what's there and what's not. The room contains 177 fingerprints, collected from every surface. Most belong to previous hotel guests, but buried somewhere in that collection might be the killer's prints. More importantly, the medical examiner quickly determines that Catherine's attacker had blood type O. In 1972, before DNA analysis, blood typing was one of the most reliable ways to narrow down suspects. The examination also reveals the stomach contents that will prove crucial to establishing a timeline. Catherine had eaten dinner approximately 2 hours before her death, which means she died sometime between 9:30 and 10 p.m. But it's the sexual assault evidence that provides the most disturbing insight into the killer's psychology. The medical examiner determines that this violation occurred after Catherine's death, a detail that transforms this from a crime of passion into something far more calculated and perverted. Detective Martinez realizes he's dealing with someone who knew Catherine personally. The way her body was arranged, the care taken to clean the scene, the bizarre post-mortem assault. This wasn't a random killing. This was personal. The investigation immediately focuses on the people who knew Catherine was staying at the hotel. Her colleagues, Andrew and Benjamin, are obvious suspects. But there are others: conference attendees, hotel staff, and perhaps most importantly, anyone Catherine might have been meeting for social or romantic purposes. Because one thing becomes clear very quickly. Catherine Wilson wasn't killed by a stranger. She was murdered by someone she trusted. Someone who knew her well enough to predict her behavior, to gain access to her room, and to understand exactly how to destroy her. The question is, which of the men in Catherine's life finally decided that her independence had gone too far? As the investigation deepens, Detective Martinez realizes that Catherine Wilson's murder isn't just about one killer. It's about an entire social circle that somehow enabled her death. The first suspects are obvious: Andrew Carter and Benjamin Clark, Catherine's colleagues who were conveniently present at the hotel. But as Martinez digs deeper, he discovers that Catherine's life was far more complicated than anyone initially realized. Andrew Carter becomes the primary focus when investigators establish the timeline. He returned to the hotel at 8:30 p.m., claiming illness, which coincides perfectly with Catherine's estimated time of death. His movements during the crucial hours between 8:30 and 11 p.m. can't be verified. He claims he was alone in his room reading medical journals. But when Andrew's blood type comes back as AB negative, he's immediately ruled out. The killer's blood type O doesn't match. Even more definitively, none of his fingerprints match any of the unidentified prints found in Catherine's room. Benjamin Clark faces similar scrutiny, but meets the same dead end. Wrong blood type, no matching fingerprints. And despite his obvious discomfort with Catherine's lifestyle, no evidence linking him to the murder. This is where the investigation takes a surprising turn. Through careful questioning of hotel staff and conference attendees, Detective Martinez uncovers Catherine's secret. She wasn't just in New York for professional reasons. She was having an affair. Dr. Christopher Cole, Catherine's former classmate and current lover, initially tries to downplay their relationship. But faced with evidence of their dinner dates and romantic correspondence, he finally admits to the affair. Christopher's story is compelling and devastating. Yes, he was having an affair with Catherine. Yes, they had planned to meet on June 25th. But he claims that Catherine never showed up for their rendezvous. According to Christopher, they were supposed to meet at his apartment at 10 p.m. When Catherine didn't arrive, he assumed she had changed her mind or been delayed by her colleagues. He went to bed, disappointed, but not alarmed. The next morning, he learned about her murder from newspaper reports. Christopher's alibi seems solid. Hotel records show that Catherine never left the Grand Metropolitan after returning from dinner. Phone records confirm that Christopher called her room several times that evening, with no answer. He couldn't have killed her in her hotel room because he was waiting for her at his apartment across town. But Detective Martinez isn't satisfied. Something about Christopher's story doesn't add up. If Catherine was so excited about their affair, why would she suddenly become a no-show? And why was she arranging fruit in her hotel room if she was planning to leave for Christopher's apartment? The investigation expands to include anyone who might have known about Catherine's affair. Medical equipment salesmen who had met her at conferences. Dental school professors who might have stayed in touch. Dance partners from the various ballrooms she frequented. Detective Martinez personally interviews 54 potential suspects, taking fingerprints from each one and comparing them to the mysterious prints found in Catherine's room. It's painstaking work made more difficult by the limited forensic technology of 1972. But every lead turns into a dead end. Every suspect has an alibi, or the wrong blood type, or fingerprints that don't match. It's as if Catherine Wilson's killer simply vanished into thin air. The case begins to generate theories that seem increasingly desperate. Maybe Catherine was killed by a random hotel burglar who somehow knew she had money. Maybe she was the victim of a serial killer passing through New York. Maybe her murder was connected to organized crime in ways no one could imagine. But Detective Martinez keeps coming back to the same conclusion. This was personal. Someone who knew Catherine intimately had planned her murder carefully, executed it brutally, and covered their tracks expertly. The question wasn't just who killed Catherine Wilson. The question was, who among her trusted circle of colleagues, lovers, and friends had finally decided that her independent spirit needed to be silenced forever? By autumn of 1972, the Catherine Wilson murder investigation had consumed hundreds of police hours and generated thousands of pages of reports. Detective Martinez had followed every lead, interviewed every suspect, and analyzed every piece of evidence. And yet, he was no closer to solving the case than he had been on that first morning in room 304. The physical evidence was both extensive and frustratingly inconclusive. The killer's blood type O narrowed the suspect pool, but still left thousands of possibilities in New York City alone. The 177 fingerprints found in the room included several that couldn't be matched to hotel guests or staff, but without a suspect to compare them to, they were useless. The timeline seemed clear. Catherine died between 9:30 and 10 p.m. on June 25th. But establishing who could have been in her room during that time window proved impossible. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel, for all its luxury, had surprisingly lax security. Guests routinely propped open stairwell doors, shared elevators with strangers, and moved freely throughout the building. More frustrating was the witness testimony that might have solved everything. Several guests staying near room 304 reported hearing what sounded like cries for help around 8 p.m. on June 25th. "Help me," and "please stop," were the phrases they remembered. But here's the tragic irony. None of these witnesses called hotel security or the police. In 1972, sounds of distress from hotel rooms were often dismissed as enthusiastic romance, rather than genuine emergencies. The witnesses assumed they were overhearing consensual activities between adults and minded their own business. If even one person had made that phone call, Catherine Wilson might still be alive. The investigation revealed other disturbing patterns that suggested premeditation. Catherine's purse had been rifled through, with all cash removed. But the amount stolen was surprisingly small. She had deposited most of her money with hotel security for safekeeping, making robbery an unlikely motive. The killer had also taken considerable care with the crime scene. The bathroom showed no signs of use, despite Catherine's apparent preparation for a romantic evening. The bed remained perfectly made. Even the fruit she had arranged was left untouched, as if the killer wanted to preserve her preparations as some kind of twisted memorial. Most chillingly, the post-mortem sexual assault suggested a level of psychopathy that went beyond simple murder. This wasn't a crime of passion or even calculated revenge. This was the work of someone who derived satisfaction from completely dominating and degrading their victim. Detective Martinez consulted with criminal psychologists who painted a disturbing profile of the killer. They described someone who likely knew Catherine well, who felt threatened by her independence and success, and who had probably been fantasizing about controlling her for some time. The killer was probably male, probably middle-aged, probably someone who appeared normal and trustworthy to Catherine's social circle. He was organized enough to plan the murder carefully, but psychologically disturbed enough to assault Catherine's corpse. This profile could have described several of the men in Catherine's life, but without concrete evidence, it was just educated speculation. As 1972 turned into 1973, and then 1974, the Catherine Wilson case gradually moved from active investigation to cold case status. Detective Martinez never stopped working on it entirely, but other murders demanded his attention, and the leads in Catherine's case had been exhausted. The case would officially remain open for 30 years, until the statute of limitations expired in 2002. By then, most of the original suspects were either dead or too old to prosecute even if new evidence emerged. Catherine Wilson's murder had become what every detective dreads most: a perfect crime. Not perfect because it was cleverly executed, but perfect because the killer had managed to hide in plain sight among people who should have been Catherine's protectors. Somewhere out there, a murderer had gotten away with silencing one of the most vibrant women of her generation. And Catherine Wilson, who had spent her life refusing to be controlled by anyone, had been permanently silenced by someone who couldn't tolerate her freedom. 50 years have passed since Catherine Wilson was murdered in room 304 of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel, but the questions surrounding her death continue to haunt anyone who examines the case carefully. The most persistent question involves the timeline that never quite made sense. Catherine claimed she was returning to her room because of a migraine, but she stopped to buy fruit along the way, fruit that was clearly intended to be shared with someone special. If she was really feeling ill, why make this detour? If she was planning to meet someone, why lie to Andrew and Benjamin? The answer suggests that Catherine was living a double life more complex than anyone realized. She wasn't just having an affair with Christopher Cole. She was actively deceiving everyone around her about her true intentions that evening. But this raises another disturbing possibility. What if Catherine's deception inadvertently led to her murder? What if someone was watching her, tracking her movements, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike? The hotel's guest records from that night revealed dozens of men who could have observed Catherine's comings and goings. Business travelers, conference attendees, tourists. Any of them could have become fixated on the beautiful woman in the miniskirts who came and went at unusual hours. The second major question involves the physical evidence that was never properly explained. Why was Catherine's hotel room so meticulously clean except for her body? Why were there no signs that the bathroom or bed had been used, despite Catherine's apparent preparations for a romantic evening? One theory suggests that Catherine was murdered the moment she opened her door, before she could prepare for her expected guest. This would mean that someone else had been watching her, waiting for exactly the right moment to attack. But who could have known her schedule so precisely? Who understood her habits well enough to predict when she would be alone and vulnerable? The third question haunts anyone who knew Catherine personally. Could her murder have been prevented? The warning signs were certainly there. She was a woman living far ahead of her time, challenging social conventions in ways that made some people deeply uncomfortable. Her colleagues, Andrew and Benjamin, had witnessed the gossip and speculation that followed Catherine everywhere she went. They had seen how her independence triggered resentment among more conservative members of their professional community. Did they have any responsibility to warn Catherine that her lifestyle might be putting her in danger? Or were they themselves part of the problem, contributing to a social atmosphere that made Catherine a target? The most disturbing question, however, involves the killer's identity and motivation. The post-mortem sexual assault wasn't just a crime of opportunity. It was a deliberate act of degradation that revealed deep psychological pathology. This suggests that Catherine's murderer didn't just want to kill her. He wanted to destroy everything she represented: her independence, her sexuality, her refusal to conform to social expectations. The murder was as much about symbolism as it was about eliminating a specific person. Catherine Wilson's case has become a touchstone for discussions about violence against women who dare to live unconventionally. Every few years, a new generation of investigators, journalists, or amateur sleuths takes a fresh look at the evidence, hoping to find the clue that everyone else missed. But the real tragedy isn't just that Catherine's killer was never caught. It's that her murder was used to reinforce exactly the kind of social attitudes that Catherine had spent her life challenging. The media coverage of her death focused obsessively on her dancing, her affairs, her inappropriate behavior for a professional woman. Headlines called her the dancing doctor and speculated endlessly about her double life. The coverage suggested, sometimes explicitly, that Catherine had somehow brought her fate upon herself. This secondary victimization meant that Catherine was murdered twice, once by her killer, and again by a society that couldn't accept that a woman's lifestyle choices never justify violence against her. The Grand Metropolitan Hotel, where Catherine died, has been renovated several times since 1972. Room 304 still exists, still hosts guests, still maintains the luxury that Catherine found so appealing. Most guests have no idea that they're sleeping in a room where a brilliant woman was brutally murdered for the crime of living life on her own terms. As we reach the end of Catherine Wilson's story, we must remember that she was far more than a victim of an unsolved murder. She was a trailblazer who refused to let society dictate how a professional woman should behave. Catherine earned her medical degree at a time when female doctors were viewed with suspicion and skepticism. She built a successful dental practice while maintaining an unconventional marriage that challenged every social norm of her era. She pursued her passion for dancing despite the whispers and judgment of her conservative community. She deserved to live a long life, to continue breaking barriers, to inspire other women to pursue their dreams regardless of social expectations. She deserved to dance until she was old and gray, to practice dentistry for decades, to see her children grow up and have families of their own. Catherine's murder teaches us about the danger that independent women have always faced from men who cannot tolerate female autonomy. Her killer wasn't just eliminating one person. he was trying to eliminate an idea. The idea that women can live life on their own terms without asking permission from anyone. The investigation's failure teaches us about the limitations of criminal justice systems that aren't equipped to understand crimes motivated by gender-based hatred. In 1972, the concept of femicide, murder specifically targeting women because of their gender, wasn't widely recognized or understood. Catherine's case was treated as an isolated incident rather than part of a pattern of violence against women who dared to challenge social conventions. This meant that investigators missed crucial insights that might have led them to her killer. For modern investigators and true crime enthusiasts, Catherine's case offers important lessons about the intersection of gender, class, and violence. Her murder occurred at the intersection of multiple social tensions: professional jealousy, sexual liberation, changing gender roles, and the backlash against women's increasing independence. Understanding these social forces is crucial to understanding why someone felt compelled to silence Catherine Wilson forever. Her killer didn't just wake up one morning and decide to commit murder. He was shaped by a society that taught him that women like Catherine were threatening and needed to be controlled. The most important lesson from Catherine's story, however, is that victims of violence should never be blamed for their own victimization. Catherine's dancing, her affairs, her unconventional marriage, none of these choices justified what happened to her. She was murdered because someone couldn't tolerate her independence, not because she had done anything wrong. The responsibility lies entirely with her killer and with a society that enabled his twisted worldview. Catherine Wilson's legacy lives on in every woman who refuses to be controlled by social expectations, in every female doctor who wears what she wants to wear, in every married woman who maintains her own identity and interests, in everyone who chooses to dance, literally or metaphorically, despite the judgment of others. The music that Catherine loved so much at those Manhattan dance halls continues to play. The beat goes on, carried forward by women who understand that living authentically is always worth the risk. Somewhere in those fading melodies, Catherine Wilson is still dancing. Her spirit remains unbroken, her independence intact, her courage and inspiration to anyone who has ever been told they're too much, too bold, too free to be safe. Time may have obscured the clues that could have led to justice in her case, but it will never diminish the truth of who she was. A brilliant woman who dared to live life on her own terms, and who paid the ultimate price for that courage. Catherine's story reminds us that some truths transcend the limitations of criminal investigations. Some victories can't be measured in arrests or convictions. Sometimes, the most important legacy is simply the example of a life lived without compromise. In the faded clues of this 50-year-old case, we find not just a mystery, but a mirror reflecting our own society's ongoing struggle with women's independence. Catherine Wilson's murder may never be solved, but her message is crystal clear. Dance anyway, dream anyway, live anyway. This is Faded Clues, where every story matters, and every truth, even the painful ones, deserves to be remembered.